Chapter 2. The Economic Elements of Civilization. Despite recent high example to the contrary, the word civilization will be used in this volume to mean social organization, moral order, and cultural activity, while culture will mean, according to the context, either the practice of manners and the arts, or the sum total of a people's institutions, customs, and arts. It is in the latter sense that the word culture will be used in reference to primitive or prehistoric societies. In one important sense, the savage, too, is civilized, for he carefully transmits to his children the heritage of the tribe, that complex of economic, political, mental, and moral habits and institutions which it has developed in its efforts to maintain and enjoy itself on the earth. It is impossible to be scientific here, for in calling other human beings savage or barbarous we may be expressing no objective fact, but only our fierce fondness for ourselves, and our timid shyness in the presence of alien ways. Doubtless we underestimate these simple peoples, who have so much to teach us in hospitality and morals. If we list the bases and constituents of civilization, we shall find that the naked nations invented or arrived at all but one of them, and left nothing for us to add except embellishments and writing. Perhaps they, too, were once civilized, and desisted from it as a nuisance. We must make sparing use of such terms as savage and barbarous in referring to our contemporaneous ancestry. Preferably, we shall call primitive all tribes that make little or no provision for unproductive days and little or no use of writing. In contrast, the civilized may be defined as literate providers. 1. From hunting to tillage. Primitive improvidence, beginnings of provision, hunting and fishing, herding, the domestication of animals, agriculture, food, cooking, cannibalism. 3 meals a day are a highly advanced institution. Savages gorge themselves or fast. The wilder tribes among the American Indians considered it weak-kneed and unseemly to preserve food for the next day. The natives of Australia are incapable of any labor whose reward is not immediate. Every Hottentot is a gentleman of leisure, and with the Bushmen of Africa it is always either a feast or a famine. There is a mute wisdom in this improvidence, as in many savage ways. The moment man begins to take thought of the morrow, he passes out of the Garden of Eden into the vale of anxiety. The pale cast of worry settles down upon him, greed is sharpened, property begins, and the good cheer of the thoughtless native disappears. The American Negro is making this transition today. "Of what are you thinking?" Peary asked one of his Eskimo guides. "I do not have to think," was the answer. "I have plenty of meat." Not to think unless we have to. There is much to be said for this as the summation of wisdom. Nevertheless, there were difficulties in this carelessness, and those organisms that outgrew it came to possess a serious advantage in the struggle for survival. The dog that buried the bone which even a canine appetite could not manage, the squirrel that gathered nuts for a later feast, the bees that filled the comb with honey, the ants that laid up stores for a rainy day, these were among the first creators of civilization. It was they, or other subtle creatures like them, who taught our ancestors the art of providing for tomorrow out of the surplus of today, or of preparing for winter in summer's time of plenty. With what skill those ancestors ferreted out from land and sea the food that was the basis of our simple societies. They grubbed edible things from the earth with bare hands. They imitated or used the claws and tusks of the animals, and fashioned tools out of ivory, bone, or stone. They made nets and traps and snares of rushes or fiber, and devised innumerable artifices for fishing and hunting their prey. The Polynesians had nets 1,000 ells long, which could be handled only by 100 men. In such ways economic provision grew hand in hand with political organization, and the united quest for food helped to generate the state. The Tlingit fisherman put upon his head a cap like the head of a seal, and hiding his body among the rocks made a noise like a seal. Seals came toward him, and he speared them with the clear conscience of primitive war. Many tribes threw narcotics into the streams to stupefy the fish into cooperation with the fishermen. The Tahitians, for example, put into the water an intoxicating mixture prepared from the huteo nut or the hora plant. The fish, drunk with it, floated leisurely on the surface and were caught at the angler's will. Australian natives, swimming under water while breathing through a reed, pulled ducks beneath the surface by the legs and gently held them there till they were pacified. The Tarahumaras caught birds by stringing kernels on tough fibers half buried under the ground. The birds ate the kernels, and the tarahumaras ate the birds. Hunting is now to most of us a game, whose relish seems based upon some mystic remembrance in the blood of ancient days when to hunter as well as hunted it was a matter of life and death. For hunting was not merely a quest for food. It was a war for security and mastery, a war beside which all the wars of recorded history are but a little noise. In the jungle, man still fights for his life, for though there is hardly an animal that will attack him unless it is desperate for food or cornered in the chase, yet there is not always food for all, and sometimes only the fighter or the breeder of fighters is allowed to eat. We see in our museums the relics of that war of the species in the knives, clubs, spears, arrows, lassos, bolas, lures, traps, boomerangs, and slings with which primitive men won possession of the land and prepared to transmit to an ungrateful posterity the gift of security from every beast except man. Even today, after all these wars of elimination, how many different populations move over the earth? Sometimes, during a walk in the woods, one is awed by the variety of languages spoken there, by the myriad species of insects, reptiles, carnivores, and birds. One feels that man is an interloper on this crowded scene, that he is the object of universal dread and endless hostility. Some day, perhaps, these chattering quadrupeds, these ingratiating centipedes, these insinuating bacilli, will devour man and all his works, and free the planet from this marauding biped, these mysterious and unnatural weapons, these careless feet. Hunting and fishing were not stages in economic development. They were modes of activity designed to survive into the highest forms of civilized society. Once the center of life, they are still its hidden foundations. Behind our literature and philosophy, our ritual and art, stand the stout killers of Packingtown. We do our hunting by proxy, not having the stomach for honest killing in the fields, but our memories of the chase linger in our joyful pursuit of anything weak or fugitive, in the games of our children, even in the word game. In the last analysis, civilization is based upon the food supply. The cathedral and the capitol, the museum and the concert chamber, the library and the university are the facade. In the rear are the shambles. To live by hunting was not original. If man had confined himself to that, he would have been just another carnivore. He began to be human when out of the uncertain hunt he developed the greater security and continuity of the pastoral life. For this involved advantages of high importance: the domestication of animals, the breeding of cattle, and the use of milk. We do not know how or when domestication began, perhaps when the helpless young of slain beasts were spared and brought to the camp as playthings for the children. The animal continued to be eaten, but not so soon. It acted as a beast of burden, but it was accepted almost democratically into the society of man. It became his comrade and formed with him a community of labor and residence. The miracle of reproduction was brought under control, and 2 captives were multiplied into a herd. Animal milk released women from prolonged nursing, lowered infantile mortality, and provided a new and dependable food. Population increased, life became more stable and orderly, and the mastery of that timid parvenu, man, became more secure on the earth. Meanwhile, woman was making the greatest economic discovery of all, the bounty of the soil. While man hunted, she grubbed about the tent or hut for whatever edible things lay ready to her hand on the ground. In Australia, it was understood that during the absence of her mate on the chase, the wife would dig for roots, pluck fruit and nuts from the trees, and collect honey, mushrooms, seeds, and natural grains. Even today, in certain tribes of Australia, the grains that grow spontaneously out of the earth are harvested without any attempt to separate and sow the seed. The Indians of the Sacramento River Valley never advanced beyond this stage. We shall never discover when men first noted the function of the seed and turned collecting into sowing. Such beginnings are the mysteries of history, about which we may believe and guess, but cannot know. It is possible that when men began to collect unplanted grains, seeds fell along the way between field and camp and suggested at last the great secret of growth. The Juangs threw the seeds together into the ground, leaving them to find their own way up. The natives of Borneo put the seed into holes which they dug with a pointed stick as they walked the fields. The simplest known culture of the earth is with this stick, or digger. In Madagascar 50 years ago, the traveler could still see women armed with pointed sticks, standing in a row like soldiers, and then at a signal, digging their sticks into the ground, turning over the soil, throwing in the seed, stamping the earth flat, and passing on to another furrow. The second stage in complexity was culture with the hoe. The digging stick was tipped with bone and fitted with a crosspiece to receive the pressure of the foot. When the conquistadors arrived in Mexico, they found that the Aztecs knew no other tool of tillage than the hoe.